Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of At the Table. If you missed last week's episode, you need to pause this and go back and listen to my girl, Chelsea, in our conversation on goodness. We talked about a lot of things. I felt like we talked about infertility and loss and childlessness, as she shared, and really kind of pointed us to a lot of great truths around what it looks like to suffer and struggle and wrestle well and to really find God in that struggle. And so I've got Chelsea back for round two of a conversation, but we are shifting gears hard. Like it's a totally different conversation, but I don't know. I can kind of see how they would maybe kind of come together when we're talking about the image of God in life. And so Chelsea, welcome back to another episode of At the Table.
Thank you.
I don't know if you got to see on the YouTube version last episode, but we got to see your cat. What's your cat's name?
Yes. His name's Lionel.
Oh, I love
And he has all the personality. We got him during COVID and he's a Hemingway cat. So he has thumbs and he's a blue Russian.
Okay, I've never heard of it. I'm not really a cat person.
It's a thing.
But I'm going to have to Google a cat with
Yes.
thumbs. And it's called
Yes.
Hemingway.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm like legit curious on what this is. So
Everyone should Google it.
maybe after Googling this, I'll end up having to get one, but I don't know. We'll see. That's going to have to be a conversation with Josh later, I'm sure. Okay. So we are shifting gears and talking a lot about like your day-to-day job and how God has gifted you and placed you to be making goodness, like so much impact, not only in your own home, in your own city, in your own community, but literally across the globe. So I'm really excited about this episode and getting to share a little bit from your brain and the greatness that it is and just how God is using you. So why don't you tell me and our listeners a little bit about like, what do you do? What is your job? What's your day-to-day look like? Because I'm really curious and I hope there's a lot of coffee involved.
There's always a lot of coffee involved. I actually have my little espresso right here.
I saw that.
So I work for an organization called Lifeline Children's Services, and I do our public policy and advocacy work. So Lifeline is headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. We're licensed in 17 states throughout the country, but then we're in 23 countries around the world. So I represent Lifeline in Congress, but also I do state level policy. And a little bit about Lifeline. So we are a holistic care organization for vulnerable women, children, and families. And we do everything from pregnancy counseling, so walking alongside women, pregnant women, as they think through what is the best decision for them and their child. We do counseling and education. We do a domestic and international adoption, family restoration, reunification, and then global orphan care. So less than 1% of all the vulnerable children, the orphans globally, will ever be adopted internationally. So we partner with local NGOs and churches in country to care for those kiddos. The thing I love so much about Lifeline, not only that they care holistically for women, children, and families, but the local church is at the heartbeat of all of our work. All of our programs have the local church at the center. All of our families, whether it's an adoptive family, a foster family, someone mentoring kiddos in foster care, are strong Christians, because we really do believe, we certainly need to be meeting physical needs, emotional needs, but also spiritual needs, and they go hand in hand. So I love that our work has the local church at the center. As far as a typical day, there's not a typical day, but kind of generally. So I live in Northern Virginia, so I'm 15 minutes from DC. So I will meet with policymakers and their staff on issues that Lifeline is working on. So part of my job is to advance good public policy that help protect children and help families flourish, and then help stave off bad public policy that would do the opposite. So I love what I get to do. The way I've described my job to people. So there's all these different industries, and I'm sorry if there's noise in the back. My cat is watching squirrels. But there's all these different industries, whether it's, big tech, oil, finance, they all have tons and tons of K Street lobbyists who are paid a lot of money to lobby on that issue. But vulnerable children, whether it's here in the US or around the globe, don't have this huge groundswell of advocates in Washington, D.C. So that's my job. I get to be their advocate and help advance child protection, child safety, family flourishing in DC and then at a state level. So I love it. I've been in policy my whole career, but I love what I get to do.
Yeah. Well, and it's really cool to hear about Lifeline. So I think I learned about Lifeline whenever we were starting our international adoption. And so that was kind of the first, I guess, exposure that I had of them. But then as I followed and then even created more connections and been able to see just so much of what they do. Like they do so much. I mean, they are all over the place. And so I think even whenever I got connected to you, I'm like, oh, wow, they're even like at Washington, and they're doing like hard work. And so tell me a little bit about did you always see yourself being in public policy? I know with your story and that you shared last episode with adoption, and obviously that is a big theme, I think, in your life and a big passion. But did you see that always connecting with wanting to be in Washington, D.C., with Congress and, lobbying for different issues, or how did that evolve? And I think even more than that, especially as a leader, how did God kind of create a path to where you're like, yeah, this is what I'm created to do. And this is what I want to do in order to bring him glory. So tell me a little bit about just how this started in you.
I studied foreign policy in undergrad, actually with the intent of moving abroad. I shared last week's episode that I was adopted internationally, as were all my siblings. But before children, my parents lived in Western Africa. My dad's an architect and they physically helped build churches in West Africa. And so I always had a dream of moving abroad and doing gospel ministry and caring for vulnerable kids in some capacity. To make a very long story short, the Lord closed that door, redirected my steps to DC instead. And I'm actually very thankful, not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I was not in a place that would have been healthy to move overseas. I was very much in the mindset of this is the holiest thing a person could do. And I support global missions and global work, but I was not in a place to be moving overseas, in a place with my walk with the Lord. But he moved me to DC instead, which the nations are here. So he's really answered that desire of my heart being here. So not really, I had a different plan, but kind of stumbled my way into the work I'm doing now. I started at a nonprofit and then actually worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years. And my boss at the time had written a lot of the pro-life legislation, but he was also the co-chair of the Adoption Caucus. And I really appreciated how he saw and prioritized not only child protection in the womb, but also caring for kids post-birth. And a little known fact, the Adoption Caucus is the biggest bipartisan bicameral caucus in Congress, which is really, really cool. So when I started working on Capitol Hill on public policy, that's when I really developed a huge passion for policy, because policy really impacts the lives of thousands and millions of people, and good policy can really impact people's lives and the opposite. So in some ways, my career path is not a straight line whatsoever, but I didn't even know the job I have now existed years and years and years ago, but I love it. It really is. The longer I've been in this city, the more the Lord's really given me a heart for government, because it is a God-ordained institution. We see that in scripture. And I really do believe that Christians need to care about what happens in government and to be involved in some capacity. Not everyone's called to work in government, but to have a care for that. So long answer to a short question. No, I didn't always want to do this, but I, again, kind of stumbled my way into it, but I love it. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. And I love that you would say, like, I didn't even know this was a job. And so
yes, exactly.
whenever people are like, okay, what's your perfect job? That like, if you could just lay it out.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that. I didn't know I could. So I love when God like works those arrangements out to where it's like, see, you had no idea the pieces that I was putting together. And then now how I get to use you. So super, super cool. So I would imagine, we just had a really big decision with the Dobbs decision. And so I would think that's probably a lot of where your energy and time and brain power is going. So maybe talk to me a little bit about, since that decision, how have things changed? Like what needs are there? Like even just kind of pull back the curtain a bit and tell us like, where are we at? Like where do things look like they're heading? And then really, I think even more so, as women that are made in the image of God, that are trying to reflect them, like, where's our place? Like, where do we need to step in and kind of take on the mantle in this?
So last summer, the Supreme Court issued a decision in the case Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And what this decision did was, I won't get into all of it, but essentially reverse the precedents that were set in Roe v. Wade. And then there was a case in 1992 called Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So it reversed those precedents that were set in those cases. It did not make abortion illegal. I think I heard some of that around the case, that abortion would be illegal or outlawed. While I wish there were not abortions in our country, all it did was send the issue of abortion back to the state. And now it basically said there's not a constitutional right to an abortion, but it sent the issue of abortion back to the states. So now states get to decide what their own abortion policies look like. So you see places like California who allow for abortion right up to the moment of birth, who are paying for women to travel to California, who are giving away chemical abortions, the abortion pill. But then you see other states who have limited abortion pretty significantly. So the issue now looks different in every single state. So now one of the big things that we're working on, and kind of the more traditional pro-life movement, I guess, if you will, is almost a 50-state strategy of how to protect children in the womb. But then also stepping out much broader than that, care for women and children. Because while I am so very thankful, and I've worked for laws and policies that protect the preborn, we know that that's not all, that there are women and men and families involved. And so working on policies that care for moms and dads and families, and really holistically care for those families. I've been very encouraged. Oh, go ahead.
Because I'm curious. So as you're saying that, what does that mean? Like unpack that a little bit about. So we're seeing, like, obviously, and we're hopeful that more moms are carrying to term, right? And they are giving birth to their beautiful children. And so, like, what do those policies, or what is it that you're working toward to help those families? Because I love that you're doing this. And so I want to almost show, like, all right, what are you fighting for these families?
It's such a good question. Yeah. Very good question. So I will say, up until a few years ago, honestly, a lot of the pro-life movement was just focused on policy-wise. There have been people on the front line serving for decades and decades, but policy-wise, a lot of the effort has been protecting the preborn. Now, there have been, so Senator Rubio introduced a bill to really have a pretty robust framework of what does it look like to have conversations around a child tax credit or paid family leave, or addressing some of these reasons that women give for having abortions and being able to target those. So, 76% of women have said that they would choose to parent if their circumstances were different. Well, great. Let's figure out how we can help them make a life decision and a parenting decision, and really holistically come in and meet those needs. So I do think there is a role for the government to play there. Again, there's been lots of conversations on paid family leave or meeting some of the medical costs or all of that. However, and this is where I love the work of Lifeline, the church can be where the government can't. We can be everywhere. The government can't be everywhere. They shouldn't be everywhere. And so one of the things, I mean, my job is largely public policy, but working for an organization that understands that we as the church can not only meet physical, material needs, we can meet relational needs and spiritual needs. And so, there's been some federal policies that have been introduced, and then at a state level, I've been really encouraged to see state and federal governments introducing policies that actually put money towards, and this is actually probably a bigger conversation about the role of government, but putting their money where their mouth is and saying, okay, women need help here. Let's have some assistance there, and having a conversation about policies that not only protect the preborn, but also equally care for women and their families.
That statistic of did you say 75%?
76, yeah.
Higher, 76. So I'm wondering, like, are there other statistics that you know, or maybe even a story specifically to where, because I think this conversation has gotten so polarized and so like hot takes, that we forget that it's people, we forget that it's legitimate humans, and people made in the image of God, not only unborn, but also like families and moms and dads that are trying to parent and to work multiple jobs, and all of those things. So it makes me wonder, like, is there a story or a conversation or more data, that really helps to kind of expose that there are legitimate needs out there? Like, it's not just a throwaway, like this is an easy out, like I think that this majority of the time is a really deeply rooted issue. And so is there maybe something that you can share that's kind of showing on this side, like how even the church is able to really come alongside and we get to be the answer to this decision in our state. So it doesn't matter if you're in Virginia and I'm in Arkansas and some of our listeners are scattered across the country, right? Like that we are practically getting to be the answer to this decision to real, legitimate families in our communities, to our neighbors. So I don't know if that maybe kind of sparks like thoughts or more data, or I don't know. What do you got?
Oh, there's a lot I could say. I think first, I would say we need to remember that there are women sitting in the pews of every single church who have had abortions, that it's not a problem out there in the world, that it's something congregate members have walked through, whether that is years and years ago, and they might never have told a soul, or someone who gets pregnant and thinks she will get kicked out of her parents' house. There's a number of different reasons women have an abortion. But I think we need to remember that it affects people in the church. And that is why I think pastors and Christians need to, at every single turn, be talking about the importance of life and the image of God, both in the preborn and how much God values those lives, and that those are actual lives and humans and made in the image of God, but how much God values moms and dads, whether that is a single mom with 5 children already, and like you said, working 4 jobs to make ends meet, whose boyfriend walked out on her in the middle of a fight, or an 18-year-old who's scared she's going to get kicked out of her house. So putting ourselves, reminding ourselves that people are struggling everywhere, and it's not just not their problem. Always, always, always at every turn, highlighting the dignity of life, but then also getting to know our communities. I think, like you said, it can feel like very polarized or just this insurmountable issue that we'll never get to solve, or we'll never get to end abortion in the United States. But each one of us live in particular places, and we can get to know our communities. So what someone struggling in a rural area they might not have access to healthcare for 2 hours, and they might need access to healthcare. And that might be something that your church can wrap around and drive her to appointments, or help pay for Ubers, or figure out a way to meet some of those needs that a woman in an or rural area cites. A woman in a rural or urban area might have very different needs. And so I think it's really important to get to know your community. I say this often, but you can't solve a problem you don't understand, and you can't understand from a distance. So we need to get to know our neighbors. You can't love your neighbor if you don't know them. So get to know our neighbors. I guarantee you, there are pregnancy centers in your community who need more volunteers, or your church can start a ministry. So I think that was a lot, but remembering, I think at the end of the day, and I think this is where the gospel comes into play, because at the foot of the cross, we're all sinners, and we're all forgiven if we are believers in Christ. So, we are not better than someone because we haven't had an abortion. And if someone has had an abortion, there is grace and forgiveness and healing at the foot of the cross. And so, really coming alongside one another in this. And remembering that we're all made in God's image, and that grace and forgiveness extends to anyone who would trust and believe.
Goodness, man, I feel like that's like a sermon right there that I think we all need to just sit in. And it's so true. It makes me think of several moments that I've walked with in a post-abortive Bible study, and they were all parents, were in church. Several were deacons. One was a secretary's kid. And so it is, I love your quote there. I think of just, it's so easy when it feels far away, or when it feels like it's not me, or it's not my family, or it's not my problem, how easy it is just to callous off and say, well, you need to figure it out, and it's not until you really invite that in and you get to hear the story and you sit in the pain. I mean, a lot of what we even talked about last episode of just really empathizing and understanding what led them to where they are, and it not being a blaming thing, and not being well, if you would have done this, things would have been different, and just recognizing that we're in a broken world, and we're all trying to make it, and we're all seeking redemption and seeking hope. And so getting to be givers of that, getting to be reminders, like physical reminders of you are loved, you are chosen, like you matter, is such a gracious opportunity that I think God gives us, that we oftentimes do not take because it's easier just to be at a distance. So I appreciate that challenge from you so much. So as we're kind of wrapping up, I think I want to go here. Because I think when you think of the term pro-life, we think of the unborn, just because of evangelicals and how conversations have happened, in politics and all of those things. But really, as Christians, as image bearers, we are to be pro-life from unborn all the way to natural death, right? Like that we are working toward honoring and valuing and giving dignity to everyone made in the image of God. So I think I'd like to end on just how do we maybe model, how do we teach our people and begin to really broaden that idea of being pro-life to, it's so much bigger than this abortion conversation. It's so much bigger than a Dobbs decision. Like this is a life's work, literally. So maybe talk to us about the importance of being able to have a theology that goes all the way, and that we're not just like siloed in on this one issue.
I love this question so much. I mean, Christians ought to care about life because Scripture does. All throughout Scripture, we see God's care for and really active work to care for the vulnerable and the most vulnerable among us. We see His direct call to care for widows and orphans. But I think really that throughout Scripture, starting in Genesis with who we are as people, and that is made in God's image. And we are valuable simply because we're made in God's image. So that changes how we view people. So we can view a person with Down syndrome as made in God's image and with equal dignity, worth, and value, and care for them. And they're, sorry about that. Real life, right?
Yeah, real life. If you're not,
I was coming to give you an amen. The cat
with the thumbs.
Yes, the cat with the thumbs. But again, I think really having those frames of people being made in God's image. And I just finished Andy Crouch's newest book. And if you have not read it, it's called The Life We're Looking For. It is absolutely phenomenal. But he tells this story. He was walking through an airport on a long layover, and he just decided to walk the airport for exercise. But every person he passed, in his mind, he was going to just say image bearer. So he walked past all these people having fights, people, wrangling kids, people on their phones, most people on their phones. And he would just say image bearer over and over and over and over. And he talks about how that changes you when you fundamentally see people as image bearers, because I think we can get into our busy lives, scrolling on social media, where we forget that the person incarcerated for life because of a horrendous crime is still an image bearer. The person fleeing violence and living for years in a refugee camp is an image bearer. And all of those people deserve the language we use to display their personhood and their dignity. And it can be so easy to, I see this all the time on Twitter, but even in conversations, to just dismiss that or talk down or to be snarky about others. But I think as Christians, we're definitely called to a higher standard. And the words we use and the way we speak about people, especially the most vulnerable among us, tell the watching world what we care about, but more importantly, what God cares about. So that's a high calling and a deep responsibility to speak of one another in a way that points to their dignity and value. And I, going back to Twitter, I had a couple months ago tweeted something in a snarky way to make a point, and a couple hours later, yes. A couple hours later, I could not stop thinking about this. And I knew I was right, of course, right? In my mind, I was like, I know I was right to what I said was true, but the way I said it was not God honoring. And I DM'd this person and I said, hey, I'm going to delete this tweet, but I wanted to personally apologize to you for how I spoke about you publicly. And it was someone that drives me bonkers publicly, but at the same time, that doesn't give me a free pass to be a jerk on Twitter about the person. And I think things like that, and regularly praying and asking God to help me see not just people that are easy to love, but all people being made in God's image, and help me to treat them as such.
Well, and I love how you took the conversation from, we're literally talking about policies and you being at Washington, D.C., like fighting for lives all across the planet. But then really, I love, and I know you did not intend this at all, but I love how it goes even to your day-to-day social media presence. So, seriously, I think it's such a reminder for me. I think it's a reminder for all of our listeners, like how you play out, how you live out your belonging, your understanding of who God is and how you treat people is all the way from Capitol Hill to your inbox and who you have in front of you and the conversations that you're having and the ability to ask for forgiveness and say that I'm wrong. All of those things are very simply the gospel, right? Like
yes.
All of those things are very simply, I am broken. I am like a flesh, and I need Jesus. And that basis alone is what compels us to ask for forgiveness, as well as fight for the unborn, as well as fight for the families that are trying to make it and that have so many things stacked against them. And so, when you buckle it down, right, like it really is our deep need for Jesus and his ability to come in and heal and move and redeem and fix and give hope and life to all kinds of situations. And so I appreciate you so much just in sharing not only the amazing work that you're doing in your day-to-day, but then even also how he's working even in your own soul and life as you are becoming more and more like him.
Thank you.
Well, goodness, we have covered so much over these last 2 episodes. So for real, if you have not listened to last week's episode, I hope that you'll go back and take a listen. Such an encouraging word and just a really fun way to connect with Chelsea. So if you haven't, I'm going to go ahead and ask again, how do they find you? Maybe even how do they get snarky Twitters or your tweets that are happening? Like, how do people find you?
Yes. So Twitter, Instagram, my website is chelseapattersonsobolik.com. And then Lifeline, if you're interested in learning more about us and our work, is lifelinechild.org.
And you know what? We didn't even talk about your new book that's coming out. So we're going to have a
round 3.
Yes, I'm all for it. I am here for it. But yeah, she's got a new book coming out. Okay, we're going to do it. We're going to do another episode right before it launches so that you can find out about women and work, which I know, man, I'm ready for it to hit the bookshelves. I think it's going to be such an encouraging word for so many of us. So we'll have you back on for that conversation. But Chelsea, thank you so much, not only for the work and the time and the energy that you are putting in for families literally all across the planet. But thanks for being a woman that we get to cheer on in those spaces.
Thank you so much. And I feel the same way about you. So thank you as well.
Well, I hope that you're encouraged just listening to this conversation and challenged, and maybe even taking from Andy Crouch and his new book and what Chelsea said, to where you walk around your school, your workplace, Target, Kroger, Walmart, whatever, and you just see people in the eye and you think image bearer and you smile. I mean, I feel like that could really be like the start of a really good week. So I hope and pray that you will take on the challenge, that you will take on the charge to love people well, to meet them where they are, and to show them who God has made them to be as a woman of God, made in the image of God. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you will join me again for another conversation next week on At the Table. We'll see you then.